A German private equity firm might toss $1 billion at the Big 12 conference, and that name might be changing soon as well. Money talks, and Brett Yormark is listening.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, folks? Happy Friday, and welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, a daily national college hoops show, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your solo host for today, Andy Patton. You are joining at the place to get your college basketball content every single day, not just from November to March. We are here 5 days a week, all year long. Folks, want to thank you all for making this show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Give a special shout out to those everyday listeners and those of you who are hanging out with us in our Discord channel. There's a link in the show notes on audio and video platforms if you want to come hang out talking college hoops 24/7 over there. Well, folks, Tony Bennett got an extension to stay at Virginia up until 2030. We're going to talk about that. We're going to close out the show with a six-pack of mid-major updates, 3 transfers, 3 freshmen or 3 recruits committing to mid-major programs. We're going to close out the show getting you all of those updates. But we start with the big story, the Big 12. We got some Big East news as well. There is a lot going on right now as schools and programs and conferences are trying to figure out how to get some additional revenue streams after the House first NCAA lawsuit. They know that they got millions and millions of dollars that they have to back pay to student athletes, and they're trying to find creative ways to do that. And of course, in the last couple of years, the person who has primarily driven changes and alterations in college athletics, maybe not primarily, but who has often been at the cutting edge of those changes and developments, that's Brett Yormark, the commissioner of the Big 12 Conference. And right now, the latest reports are that a company, CVC Capital Partners, a company based in Luxembourg, Germany, is considering, they're a private equity firm, and they are considering offering somewhere between $800 million to $1 billion to the Big 12 Conference in exchange for either 15 to 20% ownership stake in the league. That is a monstrous deal in college athletics. It's not finalized. Reportedly, there are some Big 12 athletic directors or presidents who are not super thrilled about this, who I believe the way it was phrased in the article are needing convincing, which I think is reasonable. This is a seismic shift. It's the kind of thing you can't really come back from, which I think is part of the reason that there's some skepticism of like, it may feel like a great idea right now because we need additional income. We want to keep up with the SEC and the Big Ten. And this is a relatively easy way to do that, instantaneously get that money, make your in-conference programs making as much money as those Big Ten schools, as those SEC schools. You have to keep up, adapt or die. I get it. But it's also, you can't just say, okay, we no longer want that anymore. Once you open Pandora's box, once that can is open, you don't really go back from that. And I think that's a reasonable reason to be a little bit apprehensive, whether it's as a fan of a Big 12 program or a fan of college athletics, or whether it is as an athletic director, as a school president, somebody who's actually going to be making the final decision in this conversation. A portion of that money would go towards the schools, the 16 conference members in the Big 12, and it would reportedly get those Big 12 schools to be making about the same amount of money as the schools in the Big 10 are making in their media rights deal. It's a way for the Big 12 to keep up with the SEC and the Big 10. We have talked about the Big 12 nationally. I should say that the conversation on the Big 12 is that they are third among the 4 power conferences. Again, when you're talking nationally about the sport, there's the SEC and the Big 10 are in a league of their own. The Big 12 is right behind them. The ACC is next. And then the Big East is in that national conversation as a power for basketball, but obviously a non-football conference, so they don't really get into those conversations as much. But the Big 12 wants to position themselves to be like closer to even with the SEC and the Big 10. I don't blame them for wanting to do that. They have a lot of fantastic programs in the conference. They have continued to expand and be very aggressive at trying to make moves to prevent what happens to the Pac-12 happening to them, or what's kind of starting to happen to the ACC from happening to them. They want to avoid that as much as possible. And this kind of move, whether they do it or not, is certainly the kind of move that is showing that that is their desire. They want to get that money. They want to be even with the Big Ten. They want to have their programs taken care of, their conference taken care of, no concern about other programs in the conference jumping ship. And the talks are reportedly pretty serious. And one element of this is the likelihood that there would be some kind of written agreement keeping the schools together. And again, just thinking logically, that makes sense. If CVC Capital Partners wants to invest $1 billion or somewhere close to $1 billion into a conference, and they're investing into the 16 schools in that conference, they want to make sure that those 16 schools are going to be around for a while. So I think if you're the Big 12, this kind of move, if it were to happen, would likely ensure a limited amount of realignment going forward. I think it would pretty much ensure no departures. I don't know what it would mean for incoming schools. We've heard UConn rumored to the Big 12. We've heard Gonzaga rumored to the Big 12. We've heard a little bit less so, but Oregon State, Washington State rumored to the Big 12. So this is the kind of move that would probably lock in the 16 schools, but I don't know what it would do in terms of other schools wanting to join the conference. A couple other elements here. The Big 12 is also considering a naming sponsor. Basically, you get to name the Big 12 conference if you pay a bunch of money. The same as stadium sponsors in all the major professional sports. Like it's a common thing in sports, and now it's permeating into college. The interesting thing about this is reportedly they're going to keep the 12. They want a naming sponsor to rename the big part of Big 12, but they're going to keep the 12 despite not being a 12-team conference. Obviously, the Big 10 is not a 10-team conference. The Big 12 is not a 12-team conference. The fact that they're rebranding their name and keeping the 12 part, kind of funny. I get why, I understand it, but it's just kind of funny. So that's another new thing we're seeing. An alternate revenue stream that the Big 12 is pursuing outside of getting private equity involved, but also potentially selling off the rights to the name of the conference. They're not the only conference doing this. By the way, Conference USA is reportedly looking for a title sponsor as well and is in conversations with Globe Life. Globe Life is the name of the Texas Rangers baseball field. We could also be eventually talking about Globe Life Conference USA, which frankly, I don't hate that. As much as I don't like the idea of title sponsors for conferences in general, but Globe Life Conference USA, it's fine. I think we would adjust to that fairly quickly. They are talking about Globe Life Conference. I would rather keep the Conference USA part just for simplicity's sake. As somebody who follows all 32 conferences, if they all are changing their names and they're not keeping parts of that same name together, it's going to get a little confusing. But again, another thing that I understand, reportedly with Conference USA, there's wide support amongst the voting population in the Conference USA, the ADs and the presidents. So this might happen. The report from Ross Dellinger at Yahoo Sports indicated that this might happen within the next year, and that it feels like they're kind of moving towards that being a thing that does take place for them. So if the Big 12 isn't the first conference to get a new name for a title sponsor, could be Conference USA. Last thing I wanted to mention here, it's a little bit different than those two things, but the Big East did get a new media rights deal, or I should say added more media rights partners. They continued their deal with Fox Sports. That is not changing. They are going to continue to operate on FS1, continue to work with Fox Sports. That is still the deal, but they have added two more media partners. That would be Peacock and Max. Effectively, they're adding NBC Sports and TNT with the intention of having some of their games be streamed on Peacock and streamed on Max. CBS Sports is the Big East's other media partner. They're still negotiating right now. The Big East just picked up a lot of leverage by adding two more partners in NBC Sports and TNT. I'm very intrigued to see what this means for the Big East. It sounds like they're going to still have a lot of their games on Fox Sports, including the big games, the tournament, etc. But now we might get to see some more Big East games on Max. We might get to see some more on Peacock. TNT is losing the NBA, so it makes a lot of sense why they would try to pick up some Big East games in order to fill some of that programming time. NBC is adding some NBA in part because TNT is losing it. NBC also has a lot of Big Ten games, so I think they're looking at expanding their college basketball coverage with the Big East. Definitely something to keep an eye on as we get into next season and what that's going to look like. Well, folks, Tony Bennett. After a down year, the Virginia Cavaliers are sticking by. They're extending him through 2030. We're going to talk about whether that's the right move and what Bennett can do to get this Virginia program turned around next season. All that coming up in just a second. But first, I want to tell you all about today's sponsor, eBay Motors. Passion, drive, patience. That's the formula for winning championships, and it's also what helps keep your ride or die alive. And eBay Motors has everything that you need to maintain your vehicle and to level it up to peak performance. So from superchargers to roof racks, exhaust kits to LED headlights and more, whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. Plus, with over 122 million parts to choose from, you will always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's guaranteed fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your car every single time, or you get your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that W. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply, and eBay's guaranteed fit is only available to U.S. customers. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On College Basketball Podcast, and we are moving over from our conversation about the Big 12 and the Big East and a little bit about Conference USA. We're moving into the ACC to talk about Tony Bennett, because on Thursday afternoon, the university released a statement that they are extending Tony Bennett through the 29-30 college basketball season. A big-time extension for a coach who has brought this program to a national championship, won a national championship, hasn't done a lot since then. We're going to get to that in a second. Here is the statement, though, from Tony Bennett. I wanted to read this out in a statement released by the university. Bennett said, quote, "I love Virginia, and it has always been a special place for me and my family. My staff and I look forward to adapting to the new landscape of college athletics. We will continue to build one of the best basketball programs on and off the court without compromising the values of our university." Fairly blanket statement, wouldn't read too much into that. I do think it's noteworthy that he acknowledges the changing landscape of college athletics. Certainly, we've seen Virginia and Bennett maybe not operate as much on the forefront of some of those changes, maybe a little bit slower to change some of that stuff. But we'll talk about their offseason momentarily. But I think that we are starting to see Bennett and Virginia start to make some of the moves that you might need to move to stay competitive in the ACC. Again, Tony Bennett, he brought this team a championship. 2019, they beat Texas Tech. They won the national championship. Tony Bennett has not won an NCAA tournament game since then. In this decade, he has not won a single NCAA tournament game. At some point, that becomes noteworthy. I think it's reasonable to continue to give him an extension. He's been the best coach in program history by a landslide. Again, took him to a title. They've had multiple number one rankings. They've been a pretty consistent NCAA tournament team, but they haven't won a tournament game since 2019. I mean, again, that's important. They went 23-11 last year. They made it to a First Four. They somewhat controversially were picked for one of the First Four teams over conference members like Pitt and Wake Forest and some other programs that I think people thought had an argument to make the NCAA tournament. And Virginia did absolutely nothing to help erase the idea that many people had that they didn't belong in the tournament. They played Colorado State in that play-in game and got walloped. They scored 14 points in the first half of an NCAA tournament game against Colorado State. Ended up losing 67-42 in that game. That is ringing really large in a lot of people's ears, especially after seeing Bennett get this long-time extension. Having said that, Tony Bennett has won about 73% of the games that he has coached at Virginia since he started. He's 364 wins, 136 losses, 72.8% winning rate, winningest coach in school history, 10 of the 15 seasons that he has been the head coach for Virginia, they have made the NCAA tournament. It would have been 11 had there been an NCAA tournament in that COVID year. This is a team that was going to be in the big dance, most very, very likely at least going to be in that conversation. So effectively, we're talking about making the tournament in 11 of 15 years as the head coach there. So he's earned the goodwill. He's earned the opportunity to keep coaching. Obviously, he wants to. He wouldn't have signed this extension if he wasn't interested in staying at Virginia long term. I think this is a win-win for Virginia. I know there's people who could be frustrated with Bennett. I can understand why. I don't think Virginia's doing better than Tony Bennett right now on the hiring, on the coaching carousel. So I think you stick with him. And especially because I think Virginia's had a pretty solid offseason. And I think there's a real opportunity for them to get back on track this season. Now, they lose Reese Beekman, one of the best guards in the ACC, phenomenal player. They lose Ryan Dunn, one of the best defenders just in the country, period. He's going to be one of the best defenders in the NBA. I really believe that he is that level of good as an NBA player. He's not much of a scorer, but he's a fantastic defensive player. So to lose Ryan Dunn, to lose Reese Beekman, that's a tough offseason. But what I really like about Tony Bennett's approach this offseason to transfer portal, and it may not work, but what I like about this approach is of the players that they have brought in, almost every single one of them has 2 or 3 years of eligibility remaining. We're seeing a lot of programs, especially programs that are doing full rebuilds like Kentucky and Louisville. They're going after as many fifth-year seniors as they can. They're bringing in guys who are only going to be here for 1 year. Tony Bennett's not doing that. He's going after guys who have 2 to 3 years of eligibility left, guys who might be able to develop within his system and kind of grow and learn the Virginia style of basketball. And if it works, as in these guys all adjust to Bennett's system and they all stick around for multiple years, he could be building a really significant program, because I think the upside on the players they've brought in the portal is really high. But the risk is also high. If these guys don't play as well as they wanted to, if they don't buy into the system, which hopefully you're recruiting players who you believe are going to buy into your system, or if they just, get poached the next year, maybe things go well at Virginia, but then another program comes calling and says, hey, we can offer you this to come here. Like, there's a risk in that. But this is the 5 players that Tony Bennett has brought in the transfer portal. You got a point guard out of Florida State in Jalen Warley, averaged about 7.5 points, a little under 3 assists per game last year, just over 1 steal as well. You got TJ Power coming over from Duke. That's the big name there. He was obviously a very highly regarded prospect. Only played about 7 minutes per game last year for Duke, but he's got multiple years of eligibility. And if he kind of finds his way in that Virginia system, he could be a really big time addition for them. Day Ames comes over from Kansas State, point guard, 5 points, 2 assists last year for the Wildcats. Elijah Saunders is a nice addition from San Diego State, averaged about 6 points and 3.5 rebounds last year for the Aztecs. I think he's a really good fit just system-wise at Virginia. And then they get Carter Lang from Vanderbilt, a big man, 2 points, 3.5 boards last year. So none of these numbers are jumping off the page. None of these guys average more than 7.5 points per game. Like, this is not a group of players that is really dominating the headlines. It's not going to be on the top of anybody's list of the best transfer portal classes in college basketball. But all of these guys have multiple years of eligibility. And if Bennett is gambling on these guys sticking around for a couple of years, building some camaraderie, some team cohesion, if he gambles correctly on this, I have some optimism that Virginia could be really good in a year or two. And I think they'll be better next year than they were last year, even after losing Beekman and Dunn. But if this group gels together, I have some optimism for the direction that Virginia is going. They also have a couple incoming freshmen coming in. Jacob Kofi comes over from Sammamish, Washington. He's a 4-star power forward, ranked 96th in the 2024 class. They also get Ishan Sharma, 3-star combo guard from Canada. He is 220th in the class, according to 24/7. So a couple freshmen coming in, 5 transfers coming in. Call me crazy, but I'm a bit optimistic about the direction that Virginia's going. And it sounds like Bennett's going to be there at least till the end of the decade, if not a little bit longer, if he can turn things around for the Cavs. Well, folks, we had quite a few commitments from top recruits to mid-major programs this week. We're going to round them all up here to close out the week here on Locked On College Basketball, all coming up in just a second. Turning our attention here to a 6-pack to close out the week, talking about a trio of mid-major commitments for incoming freshmen or for 2024. I think one of them is a 2025 prospect. And then 3 transfers that have transferred to mid-major programs. Don't always get a lot of opportunities to give some love to the mid-major programs, but if you've been tracking college hoops this week, not a ton of major portal moves still to be made. Most of the freshmen are committed. Most of the big-time transfers are committed. We're still waiting on Coleman Hawkins. There's a few other good names out there. Supreme Cook from Georgetown, Damari Monsanto from Wake Forest. There's some big names still left, but for the most part, there's not a ton of big movement expected as we get into the middle of June and kind of the slower portion of the college basketball offseason. But here are your 6 mid-major updates to close out the week. Number 1, Harvard lands a big-time commitment in the 2025 class. LZ Harrington, 6'5", 4-star combo guard from California, 45th ranked prospect in the 2025 recruiting class, according to On3. He had offers from USC, from UCLA, from Arizona State. He goes to Harvard. This is a huge get for Harvard. Huge, huge, huge. Harrington was pumped about the coaching staff, pumped about the family atmosphere, the camaraderie. I think this is a big time get for Harvard. I'm excited for them. One of the highest rated recruits in program history, I should say. Anytime Harvard's landing recruits over programs like USC and UCLA, you got to celebrate that, right? That's fun to see. So shout out to LZ Harrington for picking to go to Harvard here, getting at least part of his education from an Ivy League program. Number 2, Sammy Yanay commits to Grand Canyon. He's a four-star power forward from Chandler, Arizona, playing at Compass Prep High School in Arizona. 93rd ranked prospect in the 2024 cycle. He will be on campus for Grand Canyon this year. He was originally committed to Arizona State, but he decommitted following their addition of Jaden Quintance, one of the top-ranked prospects in that 2024 class, a former Kentucky commit. So Yane didn't want to compete with Quintance for minutes, so he decommitted from Arizona State. Now he lands in the same state, in the same area, frankly, at Grand Canyon for Coach Bryce Drew. Third recruit for the Lopes in this class, far and away the highest ranked one. Again, he's 93rd. He joins Styles Phipps, who's number 189, and Austin Maurer, who is number 235. Been a really nice offseason for Grand Canyon. They retained Tyon Grant Foster, which was a shocker. Everybody expected him to stay in the NBA draft process. He comes back for Grand Canyon after averaging 20 points per game last year. They had Jacoby Coles from TCU in the transfer portal, Dennis Evans from Louisville in the transfer portal. This is a really nice incoming class for Grand Canyon and Bryce Drew in their final year in the WAC. Number 3, Zion Sensley commits to Santa Barbara, 6'8", 3-star small forward from the San Francisco Bay Area. Sensley initially committed to St. Mary's. He was part of what was a very strong 2024 incoming class for Randy Bennett and the Gales. And then associate head coach Justin Joyner left St. Mary's to go take a similar job at Michigan under new coach Dusty May. And things went pretty south for St. Mary's shortly after that. Aiden Mahaney entered the transfer portal. He is, of course, now at UConn. They lost some more incoming recruits. And then Zion Sensley, who, again, is a highly regarded prospect in that 2024 class, he decided to decommit from St. Mary's and look for another school. And St. Mary's tried to block it. And this was a story that kind of got buried fairly quickly. I think they kind of quickly realized, hey, this isn't going to work. You can't really block kids from decommitting anymore, because what are you going to do? Tell Zion Sensley, hey, you have to come to St. Mary's next year. He comes to St. Mary's. He's miserable the entire time, and then he transfers. Or he transfers at midseason. There's not really anything. There's no rules really right now, so there's nothing stopping him. So St. Mary's decision to try to block Zion Sensley from pulling out of his deal with St. Mary's, just all it really served to do was make St. Mary's not look very good, and it didn't accomplish anything in terms of stopping Zion Sensley from not committing to St. Mary's. He's now going to end up at Santa Barbara under Coach Joe Pasternak. Quite a few portal additions for Santa Barbara. They get Kenny Poto coming over from Wichita State, Colin Smith from Vanderbilt, Deuce Turner, high-level scoring guard from San Diego. I almost said St. Mary's. He dropped 34 on St. Mary's earlier this year. Not a lot of people dropped 34 on the Gales, so a big-time scorer for them. I've always been intrigued by the Santa Barbara team. They tend to bring in really high-profile transfers. Last year, they brought in Johan Traore from Auburn. He was fine for them last year, but they weren't very good. They went 5-13 in the Big West, really struggled. I think there's more optimism that the roster construction this year is a little bit better for Pasternak and the Gauchos. And Zion Sensley is a guy who could have an immediate impact for this team as a true freshman after decommitting from St. Mary's. Number 4, we're getting into the transfers now after talking about the incoming freshman. Dante Allen transfers to Wyoming. Dante Allen was Mr. Kentucky in the state of Kentucky back in 2019. He then committed to Kentucky and spent 3 years playing for 3 years at Kentucky with John Calipari. He redshirted his first year, then played 2 years as a deep reserve player for the Wildcats. Averaged 10.5 minutes per game, about 4 points, 1.5 boards in 41 games across those 2 seasons. Ultimately transferred after that. Spent the last 2 seasons at Western Kentucky, so he has been very consistent in staying in that state. 9.3 points on 37.5% shooting from 3 in his first year with the Hilltoppers. And then last year, he was 8.2 points on 40% from 3 as his senior. Now he goes to Wyoming. Very different. After spending all of his career in the state of Kentucky, he heads out to Wyoming. He's going to play for new coach Sundance Wicks over there, the 9th new transfer addition for Wyoming. Their coach, Jeff Linder, left not that long ago to go take an associate head coach job at Texas Tech. That created a situation where a few more players who hadn't yet transferred out of Wyoming decided to do so. Sundance Wicks comes in, cleans up the roster, gets himself a player who had a lot of pedigree as a high schooler, who's a very good three-point shooter. This is a nice addition for Wyoming and a player who I think should contribute big minutes for them right away in the Mountain West. Number 5, Javonte Brown transfers to Rhode Island. Brown's a 7-foot center who spent his last season in college basketball at Western Michigan, where he averaged just under 9 points a game, about 4 boards and a block in 23 games, played about 16 minutes per night. Prior to that, Brown had spent 2 years at Texas A&M and 1 year at UConn. If you're a UConn fan listening to the show and you're thinking, I don't remember the name Javonte Brown at all. He only played 2 games with UConn back in the 2020-21 season. Then he transferred to Texas A&M, played 38 games with the Aggies, made 11 starts, but only averaged about 6.5 minutes per game, 1.6 boards and 1.6 points. So was not much of a, didn't contribute at all at UConn, only played 2 games. Not much of a contributor at Texas A&M, was solid last year at Western Michigan. And now he heads to Rhode Island, a program that has done a lot of rebuilding this offseason, lots of players in and out in the transfer portal. I think Brown's the kind of guy who could pop and have a very solid final year of college basketball after bouncing around quite a bit throughout his career. And number 6 of our 6-pack, our final update here, Valentino Simone transfers to Omaha. Simone is a 6'6" junior college forward from Hutchinson Community College, where he averaged 13.5 points, a little over 8 rebounds for a team at the community college level that went 29-7. In fact, his former teammate Cameron Thomas has also committed to Omaha out of Hutchinson Community College. So 2 guys coming from this program that went 29-7 at the junior college level, committing to go play at Omaha. Omaha did lose their best player to the transfer portal, Frankie Fiddler, who transferred to Michigan State. Tom Izzo does not like using the transfer portal, but he made an exception here to bring Fiddler in. Omaha's got to do some replacing in the front court. They get forward here in Simone, who should be able to help them right away. It's going to wrap it up for us today here on the Locked On College Basketball Podcast. Folks, thank you so much for making the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Once again, shout out to those everyday listeners. Isaac and I will be back next week, getting you more and more ready for the NBA draft. We got some profiles. We got some content there. We'll keep talking recruiting. We'll keep talking about this Big 12 renaming and everything that's going on there, what it means for college basketball. Of course, any updates on the transfer portal and recruiting as they continue to come in. Thanks again for listening. Have a fantastic weekend. And of course, as always, peace out.